Hello, this is Kyle, aka AlienTube. Today I've got a review of Albion's Prince sword, and paired with it is a Scabbard by Christian Fletcher. A bit about me first. I'm a sword collecting enthusiast with very little training in their use. I've recently started attending HEMA, Historical European Martial Arts, classes, but I'm very much a novice in the use of bladed weapons. I also have no real education in metallurgy, blacksmithing, or history beyond public schooling. What I do have is a decent number of swords and an eagerness to talk about them. If that sounds interesting to you, please consider subscribing to my channel. The Albion Prince. I bought this sword secondhand, but it retails new from Albion for $1,210 US, with approximately a 1-year wait time. Since I bought this used, it may not be a good example of what you'd get from Albion if you ordered new. Then again, the previous owner stated it had only been used for light cutting, such as water bottles, so I think it's probably a decent representation of the sword. In any case, this review will be about the specific sword I own. If you're not familiar with Albion, they're widely regarded as the premier maker of production swords on the market today. The Prince is from their next generation line, which is their primary line of products. Albion makes their swords via stock removal. Each sword is hand-ground to specifications. Since they're handmade, there's a small degree of variance between each blade, but Albion is known for their attention to detail, ability to meet specs, and excellent fit and finish. The Albion Next Generation line is generally not based on specific historical sword finds. That's the purview of their museum line. Instead, they designed these swords to be representative of specific types of swords. And I believe most, if not all, of their swords are designed by Peter Johnson, who is one of the most well-regarded swordsmiths around. The Prince is representative of an oakshot Type 16 sword, which was a type used in the early 14th century. With a sharply tapering blade and acute point, Type 16 swords make for excellent thrusters, but they retain a good amount of cutting ability as well. As is the norm for my reviews, I'm going to take a look at each part of the sword, starting with the pommel. This one is a faceted bronze piece that's similar to a Type K pommel, with some faceting to give it more depth and visual appeal. Albion's listing states it's inspired by one in the Copenhagen National Museum. I browsed through the collections, but I couldn't find a photo of the one that inspired this pommel. The lines on the pommel are very clean, and the overall shape is both attractive and functional. There's no hot spots or digging into my hand at all, and there's some real depth of design here. The pommel tapers in thickness, narrowing towards the end, and it terminates in an extremely clean peen block. The Prince's grip is octagonal in shape, with a wood core, oxblood-colored leather wrap, and several risers spaced throughout. This is the first grip I've handled with this shape. Pretty much all of the others I've used have been elliptical. My initial impression of the grip's comfort wasn't particularly good. I dry-handled it a bit and it felt a little awkward, a little thin, and the shape felt weird. But once I swung it a few times, got used to the shape, and did some cutting with it, my concerns faded. It turned out to be very comfortable to swing, and indexing the blade was easy as well. The seam in the leather is visually noticeable, but it doesn't detract from the appearance, and I don't feel it in the hand at all. The transitions from the grip to the crossguard and pommel are perfect. This is an area where a lot of less expensive swords don't do well. The pommel or crossguard will often be larger than the grip, creating unsightly and uncomfortable ledges. Everything here is very tightly fitted, with the leather transitioning into the next part of the hilt perfectly. This kind of attention to detail is one of the many reasons Albions are so highly regarded. Speaking of the crossguard, Albion lists it as an example of a Type 8, with a gentle curve throughout rather than sharply turned up ends. It ends up not really looking much like a Type 8 at all, in my opinion. I do really appreciate the depth of the design here, though. This is a complex shape that must have taken quite a bit of time to grind so cleanly and evenly. All the corners are chamfered nicely, and there's no hot spots when using the sword. There are a few blemishes and discolorations on the guard. I don't know if it came like that from Albion. In any case, they're only really noticeable when viewed up close. There's pretty much no gap at all where the blade meets the crossguard. This is mostly an aesthetic preference. It doesn't really affect the performance of the blade, but it looks really nice when a sword shows this level of fit and finish. Moving on from the crossguard, let's take a look at the scabbard. This is made by Christian Fletcher, who is one of the most highly regarded scabbard makers around. His bare-bone scabbards start at $695 US and can go up into the thousands, depending on the level of detail. After browsing Mr. Fletcher's website, I'd estimate this scabbard, if made now, would cost around $900 to $1,000 US. I really like how the scabbard is designed to match the prints. The shape being bronze, or at least looking like bronze, to match the pommel is a nice touch, and the red of the scabbard, though brighter than the oxblood grip, helps create a cohesive look. There are some signs of wear, such as scuffs, but they don't bother me. The fit of the blade to the scabbard is not particularly good. There's a lot of rattle and very little retention. In addition, the sword doesn't quite fit all the way into the scabbard. A millimeter or so of the sword sticks out. Since this isn't a new scabbard, it's possible the wood has either swollen or contracted from various climates, resulting in the imperfect fit. Another possibility is that Mr. Fletcher made this scabbard using his copy of an Albion prince, rather than this specific sword. Although Albion is very good at hitting their specifications, every sword will be slightly different, so a scabbard that's a perfect fit on one prince might be slightly off for another. Now we come to the business end, the blade. Here's the measurements I took of it, along with the measurements Albion lists. As you can see, it's very close to the same, although my prince is about 3/4 of an inch shorter overall and a little heavier. The sword starts at about 5.5 millimeters thick at the crossguard, distally tapering about 0.5 millimeter every 6 inches, creating a beautifully handling sword that feels light and agile. It's balanced at about 4.5 inches, which gives it excellent point control. All in all, the sword is a joy to handle. The finish on the prince is a satin that seems pretty typical of the Albions I've seen. It's got some scuffs and scratches that are the normal result of cutting water bottles. They'd be pretty easy to remove with some light polishing. The fuller runs 22 inches, about 56 centimeters, evenly splitting the blade with a very straight grind. It terminates in a gradual manner, getting shallower and thinner over the last couple inches. This is done very well, although I find I prefer fullers that end more abruptly. This preference isn't a matter of function, it's just aesthetics. In any case, the fullers on both sides of the sword are nigh identical. After the fuller, the blade transitions to a flattened diamond cross-section, although immediately after the fuller it seems more lenticular than anything else, with no sign of a central ridge. As it gets near the tip, that ridge gets more pronounced, ending in a nicely reinforced tip that is extremely well formed. The reinforcement and shape of the tip should make for excellent thrusting performance and durability. When I bought this sword secondhand, the seller stated it was still sharp. That to me implies this is the same sharpening job that Albion put on it when new, although it's possible it was sharpened since then. It's hard to see with the bare eye. When I look at some of the close-up pictures and videos, I can tell the prince has a convex grind to the edge, leading to some nice appleseed geometry that should result in good durability. To me, it's at the right sharpness for a sword, sharp enough that it can cut well and it demands respect, but not so sharp that it could easily chip or roll. So that brings me to cutting. Please keep in mind that I'm a complete novice when it comes to cutting with a sword. I've started taking some HEMA classes, but only a couple so far, and none of them have covered one-handed swords. Any failed or poor cuts are more likely to be my fault than the blades. I didn't get a chance to cut any pool noodles with this sword, just water bottles for now. The prince handled these simple targets with aplomb, as I expected. I didn't have any problems getting clean cuts, though I'm not good enough at cutting to leave the bottom of the bottle in place. I felt pretty much no resistance going through the bottles, or even when, on one of my cuts, my poor aim caused me to take a chip out of my stand. I didn't even notice that until I put the next bottle in place. The vibrations of the sword during cutting were handled nicely. It didn't jar my hands or cause any discomfort. All in all, it's a fun sword to use, and it seems very well designed, as expected for an Albion. Alright, time to talk bottom line. Is this sword worth the pretty hefty price tag Albion charges for it? I don't think it's much of a surprise that I'm going with yes, I do think it's worth it. When I compare this sword to other budget arming swords I've used, the difference is stark. The prince is light, agile, beautiful, and overall incredibly impressive. I love the look and feel of the sword, and if you haven't had a chance to try out an Albion, I'd urge you to see if you can at least dry handle one at some point, even if you can't afford to buy. It's really worth it to see what a well-made sword can feel like. Be warned, however, it just might spoil you for budget swords. As for the scabbard, I'm going to hold off judgment. I really like the look of it, but the fit is not particularly good. As I said before, this might just be from the wood reacting to various climates. It could also be that the previous owner asked for a looser fit. I can't really say if it's a good representation of Mr. Fletcher's work, and his reputation is such that I expect if I were to buy a new scabbard from him, I'd be very happy with it. And that's all for me today. Thanks for watching this review. If you enjoyed it, please hit the like button, and if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to my channel. Until next time, Alien Toot out.